Nets, wet, heavy, stinking of the lake, and dropped in the sand the morning everything changed. You have to picture it the way it actually happened. Not as a painting. Not as a window in a cathedral with the light coming through in colors. Just a beach. Just rough men with cracked hands and salt in their beards, pulling in the night's catch, arguing about the price of fish, and a stranger walking the shoreline, calling out two words that should have meant nothing. Follow me? And they went. They left the nets where they fell. They left boats their fathers had left them. They left a tax booth piled with coins. They walked away from everything a man in that world was supposed to want. And they followed a homeless teacher from a town so small the rest of the country used it as a punchline. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? That was the joke. And these men bet their lives on the answer. Put yourself on that beach for a second, because it's the only way this lands. You have a trade. You have a boat or a booth or a name your family spent generations building. You have a wife, maybe. Children, maybe. You have a plan for your life, the same way you have a plan for yours right now. And a man you barely know walks past and says two words, and somehow you stand up and walk away from all of it. No contract, no salary, no idea where you'll sleep that night. You would call that reckless. You would warn a friend against it. These men did it anyway, and the strangest thing is that not one of the Gospels records a single one of them turning back to grab his things. They just went. That decision is the first domino. Everything that follows, every grave we are about to dig, starts on that beach with a dropped net. Here's the part you need to hold on to before we go one step further. Of the men who walked away from those nets, almost every single one would die for it. Not quietly, not in bed. They would be nailed to crosses on 3 different continents. They would be run through with spears. One of them, tradition says, would be skinned alive. And the brutal part, the part that should stop you cold, is that every one of them had a way out. All they had to do was say it never happened. Say the tomb was full, say they made it up, say the word, and live. Not one of them said it. Almost. Because there is one man in this story they could not kill. They tried. They tried hard. And he simply would not die. His survival is the strangest fate of all 12, and it is the loneliest. And we will get to him. But not yet. This is not a story about 12 statues in stained glass. This is not a story about halos and folded hands and faces too holy to feel fear. This is not a story about super saints who were born brave. This is a story about terrified, ordinary men. A doubter, a traitor, a tax collector, a fisherman who once swore on his own life he'd never met Jesus, who were handed the worst deaths the ancient world could invent, and chose them anyway. By the time we are done, you will know all 12 by name. You will know who they were before the nets, and you will know exactly how each one died. And I am going to do something most videos won't. I am going to tell you the difference between what the Bible actually records and what the church remembers. Because the truth is more interesting than the legend, and the truth is strong enough to stand on its own. There is a Greek word for these men. The Bible calls them apostoloi. We translate it apostles, but the word doesn't mean holy man or saint. It means something colder and more military than that. Apostolos means one who is sent. A messenger dispatched with orders. A man handed a sealed letter and pointed at the horizon. The word for a follower who simply learns is mathetes, disciple, student. A student can quit. A student can go home when the weather turns. But a sent one carries the authority of whoever sent him, and a sent one does not get to stop walking until the message is delivered or he is dead. 11 of them delivered the message, then died. So let's count the graves. All 13 of them, because there's a 13th seat in the story, and the man who filled it has a death story too. Stay with me. We begin with the one nobody wants to talk about. We begin with the traitor. Every list of the 12 ends the same way. Matthew, Mark, Luke. They name the apostles, and the last name on every list is the same, with the same 3 words attached. Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. He is always last. He is always marked. And his death is one of only 2 in this entire story, and that the Bible describes directly, which is exactly why we start here on solid ground before we step out onto the rope bridge of tradition. Here's what Scripture actually says, and it says 2 things that don't sound alike. Matthew's gospel tells you that Judas, after he handed Jesus over for 30 pieces of silver, was crushed by what he'd done. He went back to the priests. He threw the money on the temple floor. I have sinned, he said. I have betrayed innocent blood. And they looked at him, and these religious men, and they said the cruelest 4 words in the New Testament. What is that to us? And Judas walked out and hanged himself. That's Matthew. Now hold that thought, because the book of Acts tells the same death from the other side. Acts says the priests took that blood money. They couldn't put it back in the treasury. It was tainted, and they bought a field with it. And in that field, Acts says, Judas fell headlong and his body burst open. The people of Jerusalem heard about it, and they gave the place a name in their own language. Akeldama. It means field of blood. And you can still find the traditional site today, a steep ravine south of the old city, and the name has never been scrubbed off the map in 2,000 years. So which was it? The rope or the field? The honest answer is that the early church held both, and most readers have always understood them as 2 halves of one grim end. He hanged himself, and the body fell. You don't need to choose. What you need to see is the shape of it. The first apostle to die was the one who betrayed the others, and he died by his own hand in a field bought with the price of God. But here's what most people miss about Judas. He had walked with Jesus for 3 years. He'd seen the blind man's eyes open. He had eaten the bread that multiplied. He'd carried the money bag. He was the treasurer, the trusted one. He saw everything the other 11 saw. And it wasn't enough. Proximity to the miracle didn't save him. You can stand close enough to touch the light and still walk into the dark. That terrifies people, and it should, because it means the other 11 were not held by what they saw with their eyes. They were held by something else. We'll find out what. Now watch what happens to the seat he left empty. The 11 who were left did something strange in the weeks after. They held an election. Acts tells you they stood in an upper room and said, the betrayer's place must be filled. There has to be a 12th. And they put forward 2 men and cast lots. And the lot fell on a man named Matthias. You have probably never heard a sermon about Matthias. He's the understudy who got the call. He had been there the whole time. The text says, one of the wider circle who had followed Jesus from the baptism of John all the way to the resurrection, just never named, never famous. And now he steps into the dead man's chair. What happened to Matthias? Here is where we cross the line I promised to keep honest with you. The Bible never tells us. It records his election and then it never mentions him again. Everything after that is tradition. Some accounts say he preached near the Caspian Sea and was stoned and then beheaded. Others place his death in Jerusalem. We genuinely don't know. And I'd rather tell you we don't know than make something up. Because in a minute, when I tell you the stories we do have good reason to believe, you'll know I'm not inflating them. What we know for certain is this. The seat was filled. The number 12 was restored. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 thrones, 12 men sent. The traitor was gone. The line was closed. And the 11 turned to face an empire. The first of them to fall was a son of thunder. His name was James. And you have to be careful because there are several men named James in the New Testament and people mix them up constantly. This is James, the son of Zebedee, the fisherman, the brother of John. The two of them had a temper hot enough that Jesus himself gave them a nickname. Boanerges, he called them, an Aramaic word the Gospel of Mark bothers to translate for us. Sons of thunder. These were not gentlemen. Once, when a village refused to welcome Jesus, it was these two who asked, in total seriousness, whether they should call fire down from heaven to burn the place to the ground. That's the kind of men they were. Loud. Fierce. First to volunteer for a fight, and James was the first of the 12 to die for it. And his death is the second and last that the Bible records for you in plain words. Acts chapter 12. King Herod. This is Herod Agrippa I, grandson of the Herod who slaughtered the babies of Bethlehem, decides to win favor with the crowd by attacking the church. And the text is brutal in its brevity. It says he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. That's it. One sentence. No speech, no last words, no lingering scene. The thunder is just gone. Beheaded around the year 44, barely a decade after the resurrection. The brothers who wanted to call down fire, and James got the sword first, and John was left to watch. And think about what that one sentence costs, the one the Bible spends on James. Years before, James and his brother had come to Jesus with a bold, almost arrogant request. Let one of us sit at your right hand and one at your left when you come into your kingdom. They wanted the thrones. And Jesus had answered them with a strange question. Can you drink the cup I'm about to drink? Oh, yes, they said. We can. They had no idea what they were agreeing to. James found out first. He was the first of the inner circle to drink that cup all the way down. And somewhere in Jerusalem, his little brother John, who had asked for a throne right beside him, stood in a world that suddenly had one less son of thunder in it, and began the long work of learning what their bold answer had actually meant. You should remember James as the one who said, "We can," and then proved it before anyone else. Pay attention to what happens next in that chapter, because it tells you the temperature of the times. Herod sees that killing James pleased the crowd, so he arrests Peter too, planning to execute him after the holiday. The killing worked, so let's do more of it. That is the world these men were living in. Their deaths were not tragic accidents. They were public entertainment. They were political points scored against a hated little sect. And here's the word you need now, because it changes how you hear everything that follows. The Greek word for these dying men was martyrs. We get our word martyr from it. But here's the thing that should give you chills. Martyrs did not originally mean someone who dies for their faith. It just meant witness. A martyrs was a man who stood up in court and said, I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. That's all. A witness. So how did a courtroom word for eyewitness turn into our word for a person tortured to death? It turned because of these men. Because so many of the witnesses, the people who said, I saw the risen Jesus with my own eyes, kept getting killed for saying it, that the word for witness and the word for one who dies slowly became the same word. Let that land. The language itself had to change to hold what these men did. The word for I saw it became the word for I died for it, which raises the question this whole video is circling. What did they see that not one of them would unsee it, even with a sword at their neck? Hold that question. We're going to keep coming back to it. If you're getting something out of this, if you're learning the names and the stories behind men you've heard about your whole life but never really met, do me one small favor and subscribe right now. This channel exists to make the hard parts of the Bible clear, and the way these videos reach more people is brutally simple. The algorithm watches whether you stick around and whether you tap that button. So if you want more like this, subscribe and tell me in the comments which apostle you came in already knowing the most about. I'm curious. Then come right back, because now we leave the solid ground of Scripture and we step into history where the stories get stranger and the deaths get worse. We start with the most famous death of them all. We start with the Rock. Simon, a fisherman from Bethsaida, loud and impulsive and generous and afraid, the one who walked on water for 3 steps and then sank, the one who swung a sword and cut off a man's ear, the one who swore he would die before he denied Jesus, and then denied him 3 times before a rooster finished crowing. Jesus renamed him too, Petros, Peter, the Rock. It was almost a joke at first. This unstable, sinking, swearing man, the Rock, until it wasn't a joke anymore. You have to understand what Peter did. The worst night of his life before his death means anything. The night Jesus was arrested, Peter followed at a distance into the courtyard, closer than any of the others dared. And a servant girl, a girl with no power at all, pointed at him and said, "You were with him." And Peter, the Rock, the man who had sworn hours earlier that he would die before he abandoned Jesus, looked at a teenage servant and said, "I don't know the man." 3 times he said it. The 3rd time, the Gospels say, he cursed and swore, and the rooster crowed. And across the courtyard, Jesus turned and looked at him, and Peter went out and wept like something inside him had broken in half. That is the man, not a stone, the coward, on the worst night when it counted most, Remember that because it makes what comes next almost impossible to believe. After the resurrection, Jesus finds Peter back at the lake, back at the nets where it all started. And over a charcoal fire, he asks him 3 times, once for each denial, "Do you love me?" 3 denials, 3 chances to answer again. And then he tells him to feed the sheep, and he tells him how he'll die. The coward who denied him by a fire is told by a fire that he will one day refuse to deny him at all, no matter the cost. And he didn't. The Bible does not describe Peter's death, but and this matters. The Bible does predict it. In the last chapter of John's Gospel, the risen Jesus says something cryptic to Peter on a beach. He says, "When you were young, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." And John adds a line, just so you don't miss it. He said this to show by what kind of death Peter would glorify God. Stretch out your hands. To a first-century reader, those words had one meaning. They meant a cross. And here's where tradition fills in what Scripture sketched. The early church, strong, ancient, consistent tradition, says Peter went to Rome, to the capital, to the belly of the empire. And there, around the year 64, the Emperor Nero needed someone to blame for a fire that had burned half the city. He blamed the Christians. And here we have something rare and precious, a hostile witness. The Roman historian Tacitus, no friend of Christianity, writing in his annals, describes how Nero rounded up Christians and tortured them to death in horrifying ways, covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, nailed to crosses, set on fire to light his gardens at night. Tacitus thought the Christians were a depraved superstition. He had no reason to invent their suffering, and he confirms it. In Nero's Rome, being a Christian could get you crucified. Tradition says Peter was among them. And tradition adds one detail so specific it's hard to forget. When they came to crucify him, Peter asked to be hung upside down, not out of drama, out of a kind of broken humility. He did not consider himself worthy, the story goes, to die in the same position as his Lord. Remember, this is the man who denied even knowing Jesus to save his own skin, and now at the end, he won't even die right side up because he thinks he hasn't earned it. The rock that cracked became the rock the church was built on. Head down in a Roman circus, the loudest of them all went out without taking a single word of it back. And you need to understand what a cross actually was, because we've sanded it smooth. We hang it on walls in gold. We wear it on chains. But in the Roman world, a cross was not a religious symbol. It was the single most terrifying thing the state could do to a human being, and it was designed that way on purpose. Rome did not crucify people quietly. They did it on the busiest roads, at the city gates, where every traveler had to walk past and look up. It was a billboard. The message was simple, and it never changed. This is what happens to anyone who defies us, so don't. Crucifixion was so degrading that Roman citizens were legally protected from it. It was reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest of the low. So when these men were nailed up, the empire was not just killing them. It was making an advertisement out of their bodies, a warning to everyone watching. See how it ends. The man who followed the carpenter and the warning backfired. The watchers were supposed to be frightened into silence. Instead, the church grew fastest exactly where the crosses went up. But it gets stranger because Peter wasn't the only one to die on a cross. His own brother went first into the dark places, and he went with a smile. Andrew, Peter's brother, the quieter one. In the Gospels, Andrew is always bringing people to Jesus. He's the one who brings the boy with the loaves and fish, the one who first tells Peter, "We have found the Messiah." Eusebius, the great church historian, writing in the 4th century, quotes the even earlier scholar Origen, who said Andrew went north into Scythia, the wild lands around the Black Sea, places Romans considered the edge of the world, and tradition carries him finally to Patras in Greece. There, the story goes, Andrew was sentenced to crucifixion. But the governor, perhaps wanting to draw out the agony, ordered him bound to a cross of a different shape. Not the upright Roman cross, but one shaped like the letter X. To this day we call it St. Andrew's Cross. And you have seen it without knowing it. It is the white diagonal cross on the flag of Scotland. They did not nail him, they tied him so he would die slower. And here's the detail that has echoed for 2,000 years. They say Andrew did not stop preaching. Bound to that X-shaped cross, dying by inches over what tradition remembers as 2 full days, he preached to the crowd that had gathered to watch him die. Where you and I would scream, "This man taught." Where you and I would curse, "He blessed." For 2 days. Try to hold that in your head for a moment, because it's easy to let the words slide past you. 2 days, not 2 hours. You have had a single bad night of pain, a kidney stone, a broken bone, a fever that wouldn't break. And you remember how long the dark hours felt, how the only thing in the world was the next minute. Now stretch that across 2 full days, nailed up in the open with your own weight slowly killing you in front of a crowd. Most men in that state are reduced to animals. They beg, they curse, they go silent and stare. And the tradition remembers Andrew doing the one thing that makes no human sense at all, using the breath he had left, not to plead for his own life, but to tell the people watching about the man he'd met on a different shoreline years before, the day his brother said, "Come and see." Now watch how far the rest of them scattered, because the map of these deaths is its own kind of miracle. There is Philip, the practical one, the one who, when Jesus asked how they'd feed 5,000 people, immediately started doing the math and announced it couldn't be done. Tradition takes Philip to Hierapolis in what's now Turkey, a city built over hot springs that the ancients thought were a doorway to the underworld. There, the accounts say he was put to death, crucified or hung, for the crime of turning people away from the old gods. Archaeologists in recent years actually believe they have found his tomb there, in the ruins of Hierapolis, which is a haunting thing. The practical man, the one who said it can't be done, has a grave you can visit in the city where they killed him for saying it could. There is Matthew, and you know his old job because the Gospels never let you forget it. Matthew was a tax collector. In that world, there was almost no lower thing to be. A tax collector was a Jew who worked for Rome, squeezing his own people for money and skimming off the top. He was a collaborator, a traitor, in the small daily way, hated by everyone he knew. And Jesus walked past his booth and said 2 words, "Follow me." And the taxman stood up and left the money on the table. Tradition sends Matthew far south, into Ethiopia, to preach to a people the Romans barely knew existed. The accounts of his death vary. Some say the sword, some say he was stabbed at an altar, some say burned. They don't agree on the method, but they agree on the shape. The despised tax collector died far from home, with nothing in his hands, having given away the one thing he was once famous for hoarding. And there is the other James, James the son of Alphaeus, sometimes called James the Less, maybe because he was younger or shorter than the thunder son who'd already died by Herod's sword. He is one of the men we know almost nothing about. He never speaks a recorded word in the Gospels. The traditions about his death are late and shaky, and I'll tell you that plainly. One account, attributed to a writer named Hippolytus, says he was preaching in Jerusalem and was stoned to death and buried by the temple. But scholars will tell you the text surfaced very late and probably wasn't really written by Hippolytus at all. So here is a man who gave his entire life to carrying the message, and history barely kept his receipt. There is something almost unbearably honest about that. Not every faithful death gets a famous story. Most of them don't. Most of them are just gone, known only to God. Here's the part nobody tells you, and it's the thing that should be nagging at you by now. These men are dying in Rome, in Greece, in Turkey, in Ethiopia, by the Black Sea, in cities that had never heard each other's names. They are not dying together in one purge on one bad afternoon, where you could imagine mob panic or mass delusion taking them all at once. They are scattered to the 4 winds, dying alone, years and thousands of miles apart, each one with his own private chance to quietly disappear, change his story, save himself. And the pattern holds across every one of them. None of them breaks. We're going to come back to why that matters more than any single death. But first, if this is hitting you, this is the moment to share it. Send this video to one person who loves history or one person who grew up in church and never actually learned this. That's how the stories survive. Passed hand to hand, exactly the way they were the first time. Now, the deepest part of the dark. The 2 most brutal deaths, the farthest journey, and at last, the man they could not kill, Thomas. You already know him, even if you think you don't, because we turned his name into an insult. Doubting Thomas. He's the one who wasn't in the room when the risen Jesus first appeared. And when the others told him, he refused to believe it. "Unless I put my finger where the nails were," he said, "unless I put my hand in his side, I will not believe." We use him as a byword for weak faith, but watch what the man actually does with his life. Because it flips the insult on its head. Tradition. And this one is strong, carried not just in old books, but in a living community, says that Thomas traveled farther than any of them, past Persia, all the way to India. There is a group of Christians in India today, the St. Thomas Christians, who trace their faith back 19 centuries to this one man stepping off a boat. And in India, the accounts say, Thomas angered the powerful and priests and rulers whose authority his preaching threatened, and he was run through with a spear and died on a hillside near the coast. The doubter. The one who said, "I won't believe it unless I touch the wounds." He went the farthest, preached the longest, and died on the point of a spear at the literal edge of the known world. So much for weak faith. The man who needed to touch the wounds spent his death making more of them in his own body. And here is what I want you to sit with about Thomas, because it might be the most useful thing in this whole video for your own life. We mock him for doubting. But notice what his doubt actually was. He didn't say, "I refuse to believe anything." He said, "I refuse to believe a rumor. I want the evidence. And if I get it, I'm all in." And when he got it, when he saw the wounds with his own eyes, he didn't give a polite nod. He gave the strongest confession of faith in the entire Gospel of John. "My Lord and my God." The man who doubted hardest believed deepest, and then he traveled farther and died harder than almost any of them. So if you have ever felt like your questions disqualify you, like the people of real faith are the ones who never wondered, look at where Thomas's doubt took him. Honest doubt that goes looking for the truth is not the enemy of faith. It is how some of the strongest faith gets built. The doubter became the apostle of a continent, and here is where the dark gets darkest. So I'm going to tell it carefully, because the tradition is grim, and I don't want to dress it up or look away from it. Bartholomew. He's also called Nathaniel, the one Jesus spotted under a fig tree and called a man with no deceit in him. An honest man, a man without a hidden agenda. Tradition takes him east to Armenia, and the tradition about his death is the most violent attached to any of the 12. They say that in Armenia he led the king's own brother to faith, and the powers of that place answered the way power so often does. The oldest accounts say Bartholomew was flayed, his skin cut from his body, and then beheaded. It is so fixed in memory that for 1,500 years, artists have painted him holding his own skin. Michelangelo put him on the wall of the Sistine Chapel that way, draped in his own flayed skin, and gave the face on that skin his own features. The honest man, the man with no deceit, killed in the cruelest way the ancient world could devise, for the crime of telling people what he had seen. I told you we would count 13 graves, and we have nearly all of them. Simon, the one the Gospels call the Zealot, which tells you he came from the most radical anti-Roman faction of his people, a man who had once probably dreamed of killing Romans, now preaching peace to them. And Jude, also called Thaddeus, the one who, at the Last Supper, asked Jesus the question half the world is still asking: why show yourself to us and not to everyone? Tradition pairs these two as missionary partners and sends them east into Persia, where the accounts say they were martyred together, one by being cut down, one by the axe or the club. Their stories are among the shakiest, drawn from late and legendary sources, and I'll say so. But the shape is the same as all the others. They went out, they didn't come back, they didn't recant, so count them. Judas, by his own hand in the field of blood. James, the son of Zebedee, by Herod's sword. Peter, upside down in Rome. Andrew, on the X-cross at Patras. Philip at Hierapolis. Matthew in Ethiopia. James, the son of Alphaeus, stoned. Thomas, speared in India. Bartholomew, flayed in Armenia. Simon and Jude, in Persia, and Matthias, who took the traitor's seat, gone we're not sure where. That's 12 men dead. 11 of them violently, which leaves one. I told you at the very beginning that there was one man in this story they could not kill, that they tried and failed. Here he is, John, the brother of thunder, the youngest, most of the accounts say, the one called the disciple Jesus loved, the one who, alone of the 12, did not run when they crucified Jesus, who stood at the foot of the cross while the others hid, close enough that Jesus, dying, looked down and gave him a job. Take care of my mother. And John took Mary into his home. He had already buried his brother James, cut down by Herod's sword. He would, in the end, outlive every other man on this list, and not for lack of trying to kill him. There is an old tradition recorded by the early writer Tertullian that the Romans brought John to Rome and threw him into a cauldron of boiling oil, and that he walked out of it unharmed. Whether you take that detail at the letter or not, here is what the tradition agreed on, and what the Bible itself confirms. When they couldn't kill him, they did the next thing. They exiled him. They shipped him to a barren prison island in the Aegean Sea called Patmos. And we don't have to guess about this part, because John writes it down himself in the first chapter of Revelation. I, John, your brother and partner in suffering, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God. He was an old man by then, the last one left. Every friend he'd started with, dead. James, his own brother, dead for decades. Peter, dead. Andrew, Thomas, Bartholomew, all of them dead, scattered across the world in their bloody graves. And here's the cruelty hidden inside his survival. The thing that makes John's fate the strangest and the heaviest of all 12. He was not spared because he was the strongest. He was not spared because he was the bravest. He was young and he was fierce, but so were the others. He was not spared because he loved Jesus more than the rest. He was spared so that someone would be left. Someone had to grow old. Someone had to carry all of it. Every death, every memory, the sound of his brother's name in Herod's court, the weight of being the only one who could still say, I was there, I saw it, I touched him, and not be allowed the mercy of dying young with his friends. The others got the sword and the cross, and then the silence. John got decades of remembering, alone on a rock in the sea. That is the loneliest assignment in the whole New Testament, to be the one who lives, to be the witness who has to keep witnessing after everyone who could back you up is gone. And now, stand back from all of it, because here is the thing I most want you to see. The thing that makes these 13 graves matter to you, sitting wherever you are 2,000 years later. People do not die for what they know to be a lie. Think about how human beings actually behave under pressure. You've watched it your whole life. Conspiracies collapse the moment one person is offered a deal. Co-conspirators turn on each other within weeks of the first hard question, the first real threat. We all have a price. Threaten a man's life, threaten his family, give him one easy sentence to say to make the pain stop. And the truth is, most of us would say it. We would say almost anything. That is not cowardice. That is being human. So put yourself in the room. Imagine it is your turn. You are kneeling on a stone floor in front of a Roman magistrate and your wrists are already bound, and you can hear what they're doing to the people ahead of you in line. The magistrate is almost bored. He's done this 100 times. He doesn't even want to kill you. It's paperwork. It's a slow afternoon. He offers you the deal he offers everyone. Just say the words. Curse the name. Drop a pinch of incense on the coals in front of the emperor's statue. Say, Caesar is Lord. And you can stand up, walk out into the sunlight, go home to your family, and sleep in your own bed tonight. That's all. A sentence and a pinch of dust. Your children are at home. You can be there by dark. All you have to do is unsay the one thing you can't stop knowing is true. What would you do? Be honest. Most of us, if we're honest, can feel our own hand reaching for the incense. And this is not a thing I'm inventing for drama. We have the actual document. Around the year 112, a Roman governor named Pliny the Younger wrote a letter to the Emperor Trajan, asking for advice on exactly this problem. What do I do with these Christians? And he describes his own test in his own words. He would haul in the accused and order them to curse Christ and worship the emperor's image. The ones who did it, who said the words and dropped the incense, he let go. The real ones, he wrote, the genuine Christians, couldn't be forced to do it no matter what he threatened. So he had them executed for their stubbornness. There it is, in black and white, written by a man who didn't believe a word of it. The door was always open. The lie was always on offer. Say it and live was a real standing policy of the Roman state. Thousands of ordinary people, not just the apostles, walked up to that open door and walked past it to their deaths. Now look at these men again, scattered across the entire known world, tortured separately, killed separately, years apart, with no way to coordinate a story even if they'd wanted to. Each one offered in his own moment the same simple deal every empire offers. Just say it isn't true, and you can go home. Just say you didn't see the tomb empty. Just say you made up the resurrection. Say it and live. A liar breaks. A man protecting an invention breaks the moment it cost him his skin. But a witness, a real one, a martyrs in the oldest sense, a man who actually saw something with his own two eyes, a witness can't be argued out of what he saw. You cannot threaten the sunrise out of a man who watched it come up. You can only kill him. And they killed almost all of them, and not one of them, in 2,000 years of records, is remembered as the one who finally cracked and said it never happened. This is not proof of heaven. I won't tell you it is. But it is a fact of history that has to be reckoned with by believer and skeptic alike. 11 frightened, ordinary men were given a choice between a comfortable lie and a horrifying death over and over in cities that never spoke to each other. And every single time they chose the death. They had nothing to gain. No money, no power, no safety, no fame in their own lifetimes. They had only the thing they kept repeating right up until the swords came down. We saw him. He's alive. We saw him. So let me give you 3 things to carry out of this. The first is about the truth, and it's the smallest. Most of what you've heard your whole life about how the apostles died is tradition, not scripture. The Bible itself only records 2 of these deaths in plain words, James by the sword and Judas in the field. And that's worth knowing, because a faith that needs you to confuse legend with the Bible is a weak faith. But notice, the core fact doesn't depend on the legends at all. You don't need the boiling oil or the X-shaped cross to be a believer. The bedrock fact that these men suffered and scattered and died, and the message spread anyway, stands on the plainest history there is. The second is about who they were, and it's for you. Not one of these men was a hero by nature. The rock denied he ever knew Jesus. The doubter refused to believe without touching the wounds. The Thunder Brothers wanted to burn a village down. The taxman was a traitor to his own people before he ever followed anyone. They were not made of better stuff than you are. You have looked at brave people your whole life and assumed they were a different species, born without the fear you carry, built for the thing you could never do. These men prove the opposite. Whatever held them was not in their character. It was outside them, in the thing they had seen, which means the question for you was never, could I be that brave? You're asking the wrong question, and it will only ever make you feel small. The real question is the one they kept answering with their lives. What have you actually seen? And would you stake your life on it? Bravery was never the point. The witness stand was the point. And the third, the one I want to leave ringing in your ears, is this. The word for witness became the word for one who dies. That is not a coincidence of language. That is the entire weight of this story compressed into a single word. To witness, to truly say I saw it, turned out to cost everything for almost all of them. And the one man who was not allowed to die for it was handed the harder thing, to live and remember and write it down, alone on his island, so that the testimony of 12 dead men could reach a beach 2,000 miles and 2,000 years away, and find you, right now, in whatever room you are sitting in. You are the far end of a chain that started with wet nets in the sand and runs through 11 graves on 3 continents, and one old man on a rock in the sea. And every single link in that chain held because somebody refused to say it never happened. The chain reached you. That's not nothing. That's the whole point. So tell me in the comments, which one of these deaths hit you the hardest? And be honest about the other question. The one this whole video has been asking you. If you'd been one of the 12, with the sword at your throat and one easy lie standing between you and home, which one do you think you would have been? The one who held? Or the one who broke? They left their nets on a beach, and they never picked them up again. 11 of them died with empty hands and a sentence they would not take back. One of them lived long enough to write it all down. And every word you've heard today reached you across the wreck of all those graves for a single reason. Because somebody saw something and would not, could not, did not stop saying so. Think about how easily this story could have ended in silence. One frightened man on one bad night, deciding the truth wasn't worth the price. It would have only taken one. One of them cracking in Rome or India or Armenia saying, "Fine, you're right. We made it up. Let me go home." And the whole thing thins out into just another rumor that died with the people who started it. That's what happens to lies. They have a shelf life They last exactly as long as it's convenient to keep telling them, and not 1 second longer. But this didn't thin out. It got louder every time they killed one of the men carrying it. And you are the proof. You, right now, 2,000 years downstream, knowing their names: Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, the other James, Simon, Jude, and the man who took the traitor's chair. You are the thing they died to reach and could not have imagined and somehow trusted would exist. The witnesses are gone. The testimony is still standing. The question now is yours.